Welcome to this week's edition of Theology Thursday. I'm Pastor Chris Laughlin of Emmanuel Lutheran Church, joined as ever by my stalwart colleague and friend, Pastor James Smith, who is both the pastor of St. John Lutheran Church in Three Rivers and the rector of Trinity Episcopal Church, also in Three Rivers. And congratulations, second-time dad with the birth of your second son. We are also joined by our wonderful Bishop Craig Satterly. As you can tell, Bishop Satterly, I don't give the introduction a whole lot of thought before I actually start.
That's all right. Wonderful is nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
and resident liturgical expert.
And that's
important for Lent video. Yeah.
No, seriously, that's why we invited Bishop Satterly to be with us for this edition of Theology Thursday. Pastor James and I were having a conversation about Lent, and Pastor James said we should do a Theology Thursday on this. And I said, well, let's invite the bishop because, he's literally a liturgical scholar. And so Bishop, could you tell me, we did, as we usually do, we did a little bit of pregame. Bishop, could you tell all of us then what you just told us about I know your thesis was on Ambrose of Milan, but then you went on a bit more. Would you tell us about that?
My thesis, which is a book, is on Ambrose of Milan's post-Easter preaching to those who were baptized at Easter, at the Easter Vigil. So for Ambrose, in his time, Lent was a time when those preparing for baptism engaged in, intense preparation to be joined to Christ in the waters of baptism. Now, when adult baptisms ceased for lots of reasons, the church continued Lent as a time of preparation for the dead, for our celebration of the death and resurrection of Jesus. So Lent could be seen as a time of contemplating or considering our need for Jesus, or it could be seen as a time of preparing ourselves, training, if you will, for the new life Jesus brings. And either way, it's an opportunity for us to pause our lives and to reflect on them in light of the gospel and to see kind of how we can get back on track, because we all lose track, if you will. So I used to tell students and I tell people that Lent really is about focusing on us and doing things that help us to become closer to Jesus. And then when Palm Sunday starts, if I had my way, all Lenten discipline would stop so that we would take the focus off ourselves and be totally committed to investing in contemplating, considering, learning, celebrating what Jesus does for us that week. And I guess what I didn't say to you is that's when I was a parish pastor, that's how we structured everything. That during Holy Week, we had worship every day at least once. And the only thing that went on in our congregations was worship. Everything else was done. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yep. So
That's awesome.
made for a really intense Lent because you had to have all the Easter bulletins done before Palm Sunday. So,
Yeah, right. On that subject, I was going to ask, what are some things that you find helpful in doing that, the first 30-ish days or so of Lent, doing some of that self-preparation, if you don't mind sharing?
That I do personally?
Personally, yeah, or recommendations for anyone else.
The four classic disciplines of Lent are prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and kind of study, if you will. I wrote a book on stewardship. I think almsgiving is a really important thing. Some want to turn it into service. I want to keep it about money, because money is such a driving force in our culture. It's what separates us from God. So I think it's important to figure out, what am I going to do with some money this Lent? As a way of saying, you know what, I could invest in money, but nope, I'm investing in Jesus. And as a sign of that, I'm giving some money away. I think that's really important. I always make a point sometime in Lent to engage in individual confession and forgiveness with the pastor, so that I can actually own my sinfulness in more than the brief order of confession that we do in worship. I find it very powerful to actually say to someone, here are the sins that I am carrying for the last year, at least. So I find that really helpful. You know, giving up and taking on for Lent, the fasting piece of it. You know, I think that's got to be a more deep thing, at least for me, than I'm going to give up, you know, ice cream, because there will come a time when I will have a day during Lent where it's like, you know what, I'm having ice cream. And there it's gonna, you know, you just I really, but I'm going to be a mean human being if I don't have some ice cream. And so there, I think the trick is to not say Lent is ruined, but I need to get back on track or figure out what's going on. You know, I was taught that we take things on in Lent or give things up in Lent to share in the suffering of Jesus. So that the you know, the yearning for ice cream is a mild way of suffering with Jesus. But I also think of graduate school where one of my professors said to me, I was preparing for exams, and he said to me, you know, exams are your Lenten discipline this year. So you're to do whatever you need to do so that you can do well on your exams. You eat what you want. And I looked at him and I said, well, I have to give something up for Lent. And he, a good Catholic priest, said, well, Greg, you talk a really good game about grace. You're gonna this year learn to live by grace.
Wow.
He was right.
Can we go
so
back
a funny
minute?
story real quick, sort of along the lines of the ice cream is my internship year, I would do like total fasts on Ash Wednesday or Good Friday or what have you.
Yeah, I tried that once.
Well, yeah. And so my senior year of seminary, my last year, was the first year that I was in a relationship with a significant other. And you want to talk about confessing to someone who can tell you the truth of what you are. We got to about 7 o'clock and she said, you are not doing this again. You've been acting like a jerk all day. You know, it's kind of, who is this for? You know, like Christ already suffered once and for all. So if your suffering is inflicting suffering on other people,
right,
or
right,
something you feel like you're doing to check off a box, what is the point of it? You know, and that's my problem. I struggle with what to do with it, because sometimes I feel like it does feel like a list or busy work, or think about Christmas. You have to buy everyone a gift, and that's almost what it feels like right about now. Is we've got a week until Ash Wednesday or whatever. I have to think of something to give up. It's like, well, this can't be right. You know, there has to be more to it than that.
Yeah, I gave up. I tried to fast on Wednesdays during Lent too at internship, and of course we had all kinds of worship services, and my supervisor, God bless him, looked at me like, Wednesdays you're going to do this?
I used to be able to fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, but I never gave up my running schedule. And I came to a point in life where it was no longer, my body couldn't run. And like Wednesday was fine. And Thursday, like it hurt a lot.
Yeah.
And I came to the point where it was dangerous. Because the point of Lent is, the Lenten discipline is not to fall off the treadmill and, you know, do serious damage.
Right.
So
yeah.
About mile 4, I was like, I'm not doing this again next year.
Yeah. But I think there are benefits to taking on and giving up if we can understand why we're doing it and why we're choosing this this year. Right. Yeah.
Can we circle back to something you said, Bishop?
Sure.
And this, because I think this is important for, you know, I assume that mostly Lutherans are listening to this, but who knows who is listening to this? You mentioned something about individual confession and forgiveness.
Yes,
And I would just like to go back and emphasize that Lutherans didn't stop that. Most of us don't have
No.
little confessional booths.
right.
But we never gave up that practice, and it's in all of our hymnals.
It's all in all of our hymnals. And the first thing people could do is actually get a hymnal, right?
Mhm.
And look at the service. What we did stop was the enumeration of sins
Right, right,
and penance.
right.
And a part of me, I wonder about stopping penance. I don't think we need penance to receive God's grace, but I think it helps us to be restored to community if we kind of do something to say, yeah, I'm really sorry,
Mhm.
you know? Yeah. Yep.
So it's not about Hail Marys, but let's say, I don't know, let's say you've got an addiction to porn. You can maybe give to a women's shelter.
Yeah.
Then,
Yeah.
does that kind of make sense?
Right. I mean, in the old days, they would send people on a pilgrimage, right? To get,
Mhm.
and we're like, oh, well, yeah, okay. Something had happened in the village and we need to find an excuse to get them out of town for a while. So that everybody can call, you're going on a pilgrimage. Yeah.
In the days before the whole village could follow you electronically.
Exactly, on
Yeah.
Facebook. Yeah, exactly. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm okay with not enumerating sins. And I would say that we would call it amendment of life. Now that you've received God's forgiveness, what are you going to do? What do you do with that?
Well, if you're truly remorseful about messing something up, wouldn't you want to make some effort, incomplete as it might be, to
Right.
make it right? And
Yeah.
and I think that is the modern day Roman Catholic understanding as well.
I do
I
too.
don't think it's as much about Hail Marys anymore as let's
it's
sit
not.
down and have an in-depth conversation and figure out what we're going to do here.
Right, exactly. Yep. But I was introduced to individual confession in seminary, and I found it just to be a wonderfully graceful experience to have someone kind of look you in the face and say, your sins are forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is what Luther talks about.
Exactly.
The
Yep.
embodiment. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
Can we circle back to something else you said, Bishop,
Sure.
about because you talked about almsgiving as opposed to service, and that's helpful for me because sometimes I get them mixed up in my head. So thank you for that
Yeah.
delineation. Because it kind of relates back to our text for this past Sunday, right? Give to all who beg from you, give without
Yeah.
expecting anything in return.
In return, yeah.
It would be interesting to take that sort of on as those words of Jesus, those hard words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Plain is what we heard on Sunday.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be sort of the Lenten discipline. And you've talked, Bishop, often about stewardship and how the money has a hold on us, and the way to break that hold is to give it away.
The only way is to give it away.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have friends that during Lent, they walk around with I don't know where they get the money, but they work around, they have $45 bills. Now 40 for Lent, $5, and their goal is to give it away by the end of Lent.
Interesting.
Cool.
They think it's a fabulous experience to be engaged, but that's their goal, is $45 bills.
That's really neat.
Yeah. The trick for me, I think, would be giving it away freely and not sort of evaluating the worthiness of the individual receiving it.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know,
and that's, Chris, I think, is part of the takeaway from this past Sunday's lesson as well. Is
right.
He gives to the wicked and ungrateful as well. And part of what that giving away does, is it helps us see people more as God does, where it's like, they might misuse it, and it's not up to you.
Bingo.
Yeah.
So
and I think societally, I mean, what is it that we're debating as Congress, the child tax credit?
Right.
That has
Oh,
moved,
yeah.
millions of people out of poverty, millions of kids.
Right.
But our concern is, well, what if somebody gets that money and buys a lottery ticket? So we're gonna stop doing this because someone might misuse the system.
wait,
We
could
wouldn't
we
be
back
doing
up?
anything.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah.
I would back up even further and say, why the lottery? Like, we could just do away with the lottery if that's what we were concerned about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right.
No. Sports gambling is a new thing that's everywhere. Every other billboard is either cannabis or sports gambling. Those are the two.
Oh,
Or
man,
TV commercial for the sports gambling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's insane. You can't. We're getting a field here, but
Well, right.
yeah.
Actually, I mean, in some ways, so it's interesting. We talk about not giving up stuff for Lent that's bad for us. You should just give that up because it's bad for you. But breaking addiction, I mean, addiction and sin is a powerful.
Yeah.
The analogy for sin is addiction. Sorry, it doesn't go the other way necessarily.
Right. Yeah.
But breaking that hold over you, the thing that's getting in the way between you and God, and
Right.
gambling can definitely be an addiction.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
So then, Bishop, given your framework, would you say that Lent was dour?
Was Lent dour?
Yes.
I don't know that Lent needs to be dour.
Okay.
I think Lent could be intense, right? Is training for the Olympics dour?
Ooh, good
I don't
analogy.
think so. Is training to run a marathon, is that dour? I don't know. I don't run marathons. But not the people I talk to wouldn't say so.
Right. I mean, maybe the part of it though is we need to distinguish in our Lutheran theology the idea behind we are promised a gold medal at the end and we've already received it. Because I think most of us think we've already got it, so why bother training? And I think the idea of discipline, does feel dour for a lot of people. They kind of flinch at that, and it's not an if-then proposition, but it's train as someone who's going to finish the race, I guess.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And I mean, yes, we're all guaranteed a place in heaven, but there's hopefully a lot of years between now and heaven. I'm praying for that. Now, how do we choose to live? How do we want to live? Jesus' life, the new life Jesus brings can begin tomorrow if we live differently. And that's, I think, what the training is about. Maybe the thing that we need to give up this Lent, I just thought of this, is like reacting so quickly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we could count to 30 before we post on Facebook. Maybe we could give the other person who we just want to smack the benefit of the doubt. Maybe that's what we need to do.
Yeah, but Bishop, I'm sorry, but all three of us love preaching. You the most, but all three of us.
I don't know if I love the most, but
it reminds me. I preached on love your enemies this last week, and I said part of loving your enemies is you're taking back control over your life instead of letting your enemy set the agenda.
Really,
here's what I'm going to do. Here's how you should react. You get to choose how to react. So
that's really good.
That goes right along with it.
Yeah.
I'm actually going there during my Lenten series because by holding a grudge, we give people free space in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And the space in my head is much too valuable to give it to lots of people who aren't Jesus. So
right.
That's good too.
So I appreciate your reframing of our understanding of Lent, Bishop. My next question, and we didn't just so everybody else knows.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
Even the crucifixion in John is not dour.
No,
right.
Not in John.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Jesus is still giving away, kingly gifts right there from the cross.
Exactly. Right. Yep.
They have to stick him in the side just to make sure he's dead after all the talking that's been going on.
But, so no, I don't think Lent has to be dour. No.
I agree.
Yes, thank you.
It's not a 40-day parade necessarily, as some may say, but
exactly.
Right. doubt.
Just as if we take Christmas seriously, Christmas may not always be joyous.
Right.
No, well said.
Yeah. If you've read the Gospel of Matthew, for instance, so
Yeah.
you know, with the
Yeah.
slaughter of the innocents and the flight into Egypt, and
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Or as the bishop preached so well at, Timothy's baptism, Mary and Joseph are probably exhausted from all the travel they've had to do, from the census to the presentation to everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
Yep.
But they did not get COVID a few days after having their baby.
No, they did not. No, that is true.
Oh, no, that's true. They may have had much worse diseases because, they don't actually have medicine, but anyway. Yeah, Mary was lucky to survive childbirth because that's where we were as a
This
civilization.
is a fair
back
point
then.
as well.
Sorry, I don't mean to downplay your
I'm
suffering
allowed to
there.
complain. I still have a week before Lent starts. I'm allowed to get out.
You
and
are allowed to
and
complain. That is
still.
true. Yes, you are allowed to complain. Yep. Yep. And I appreciate you mentioning COVID so that we all know that it is not over.
No, it's still
Correct.
real.
Yeah.
Yeah, the National Guard's getting called up to be teachers now. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. My opinions are my own and do not
Yeah.
reflect those of any other department, bureau, or agency of the federal government.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I had to say that.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, Pastor James was referencing back to the 40-day parade around the cross, which is not what Lent is.
Yeah.
Oh, the thing that you said earlier, Bishop, and we didn't pregame this, so I'm sorry. You said that Lent is about getting back on track because we
Yeah.
all get off track. Because when you were talking about the other things about Lent, it sounded like, largely Lent is just a sort of a concentrated time of discipleship, because
Right.
the
Right.
almsgiving, the prayer, the fasting, and the study should
Yep.
be just a part of the Christian life.
Right.
Because in my head, I've got a parishioner or two probably thinking to themselves, well, how is this different from the Christian walk? But the way you framed it earlier.
It is more intense. It's getting on track. It's taking a pause, which I think we all do that as pastors. Every 3 years, we have to do boundary training because we all know this stuff, but we may have not, God forbid, not in a terrible way, but we may need to be reminded that, oh yeah, Facebook, I keep picking on Facebook, posting on Facebook is like shouting, into the street. It's not a confidential place. Oh yeah, so I think we all, preaching, I tell people you need to re-examine your preaching method every 3 months to make sure that what you're doing is still what you want to be doing. I think we all have to, I got to go to the ophthalmologist every 4 months to make sure my eyes are staying on track. I think that's what Lent is. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. And I was even thinking of the Sermon on the Mount, because we're doing our Bible study on the Sermon on the Mount, and just if you haven't read it recently, read it, and not just the Beatitudes. There's so much in there, and there's no way anyone is keeping that perfectly.
No.
But 40 days to really think about where you're at, what Jesus is saying, how does the way you're living compare, I think is useful. I think doing that a full year, that you just go crazy trying to keep that focus. I mean, hopefully someday we get closer, but I think it's a good time to take stock.
I have a couple of things. Can I add?
Please, I was just
Okay.
going to say, I thought we'd covered it, but if you all had something, so Bishop.
So
please.
I am regularly asked about on Ash Wednesday, we get ashes on our forehead after hearing, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them. And how do you rationalize that? I have come to think of Lent as a time when the church goes into its room and shuts the door and prays to our Father who is in secret. And our Father who is in secret hears us. So we are all in our room together, if you will, in our church. And this is a prayer. And maybe it's not for the world to see, but it is for us to see, to remind us, one, of our need of Jesus, and two, to remind us that we have sin going on in the church. And maybe Lent is the time when we are in our room and we get our house in order. So maybe, Chris and James are doing great, but maybe the faith community on all levels needs to take a look at itself and figure out how it needs to get more in line with Jesus. So Lent can be a corporate event as well as an individual event. That makes sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I look at it that way. The other thing we were going to talk about that we didn't was fish.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yes. And so fish, the joke in my house is when we are on the road in Lent, we are really happy because Culver's has a great walleye sandwich.
Yeah, they do.
That you can only get during Lent. Which is just, that's not the purpose of fish on Lent. And with the history, as I understand it, is don't eat meat on Friday. Fish became okay in order to help the fishing industry near Rome, which was in trouble. But the gift of eating fish on Friday is changing up the diet. I think gives me pause to remember that we are in Lent. And it's kind of a reminder to pray or whatever it is that I'm doing. It's like an external nudge. So in our house, eating fish on Fridays and Lent has kind of spilled over to we eat fish on Fridays generally. And it provides a spiritual pause because Sunday dinner in our house really doesn't work. It's gonna get up in the morning, go somewhere, get back, be exhausted.
Right.
But Friday has become kind of that thing. So there is something about food, I think, that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think Bishop, your point about the cross being a corporate or communal sign, I think fish at least used to work that way, and it sounds like in your family still does. You think about kids growing up in a Catholic community where the whole neighborhood, eating fish on Friday is something they're all going through together. I wonder, the ashes in church is one way we can kind of model that, but what's another way we can model our community together, and have a common experience? Because I think that's so needed right now when, we've all got 15 different streaming services and are all watching different things. We're doing our different sports. What are things that unite us? And fish kind of used to be one of those.
For Lutherans, I think, before COVID, it was Wednesday soup suppers in Lent, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which I laugh because I've watched soup suppers turn into soup competitions over the year.
Yeah, it's that part of Romans where Paul says, "But sin, seeking an opportunity, found a way in," or what?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, on a somewhat more serious note, I started my internship in the Pittsburgh area, which was even more Catholic than the Philly area where I grew up. Yeah. And the fish fries were really a social time. Because whether you were Catholic or not, by the way, everybody went to the fish fries in the rural areas around Pittsburgh, or at least where I served my internship. And, there's not a whole lot of suffering. This has nothing to do with the fish fries, but there's not a whole lot of suffering or giving up that goes on when you interpret fish as, shrimp and lobster.
Right.
But again, is Lent all about sin and suffering and dour?
No.
Or is it, as the bishop, I think, said, having that experience of being in it together as a church? If people are going to the fish fry on Friday, then they're not going to the bar on Friday or whatever else they might be doing at that time, Or
they're sitting across the table talking to their neighbors about things that matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Kathy and I, when we dated in upstate New York, Fridays were fish fries. So that we would go to fish fries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Because that's where everybody was.
Yep. Yeah.
It's a helpful reframing, because my father used to say he never felt like he was deprived in Lent when he got his, grilled cheese sandwich and his Campbell's soup, and there had it was the tomato soup, Campbell's tomato soup. And perhaps being deprived wasn't the point.
Right. Yeah. And I always get excited in Lent because I get to wear purple.
Mhm.
And I have a beautiful purple coat that maybe will get to wear this Lent. That's the long one. And I wear a lot of purple. I sit with purple in the background. And for me, purple, it's penitence, but for me, purple always brings to mind, since I've been bishop, the story of the rich man who was clothed in purple, and Lazarus, who laid at his gate, and the dogs licked his sores, and that purple is a good reminder of that we need to be connected to the poor.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing to think about. At least I think about in Lent.
That's a really helpful reframing there too, Bishop, because I'd always been told that the purple during Lent was the color of the Passion.
Yeah. Yep.
So thank you for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yep.
And stay tuned in your local congregation. That story will be coming up sometime in October this year. And I'll try to think of something rather than stammering guiltily the entire time. So
You mean as we feast sumptuously every day with my cats who would love to eat the crumbs that fall from my
That
table?
fall from the table. Yeah.
I've seen how we eat. We're doing okay compared to a lot of people. So.
Yeah. Yep.
Pastor James, is there anything else you want to add or ask the bishop?
No, thank you for inviting me to this. I learned a lot today.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy being with the two of you. These are great, uplifting conversations, and I at least need some uplift these days. So
Amen. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know. Well said, Bishop. And thank you for joining us. It was Pastor James's idea to start this Theology Thursday, and I thought no better authority than the bishop that we could actually ask and would show up when he's got a PhD in this stuff. So
thank you.
So
thank you, Bishop.
Thank you. Peace.
Peace.
Thank you, Chris. Peace.